The Devil in the Sky. When Samurai Met Machine. The Last Laughter. September 1943, Rabaul Airfield, New Britain. Sweat trickled down Lieutenant Commander Shedeur Sakai's forehead as he turned the page of the intelligence report. His remaining eye, the other lost in a fierce aerial battle with American gunners a year earlier, scanning lines that made him laugh out loud in the humid command tent. "The Americans have just produced a new fighter," he read aloud to the surrounding pilots. "Heavy as a bomber, wide as a transport. They call it the Hellcat." Laughter erupted throughout the tent. Junior Lieutenant Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, with 47 confirmed victories, nearly fell from his chair. "Twice the weight of our Zero? Have they gone mad?" Through the tent flaps, they could see the squadron's A6M Zeros lined up on the pierced steel planking. Sleek, nimble, deadly. For 2 years, these aircraft had dominated Pacific skies like gods of war. Britain's Hurricanes, America's P-40s, Dutch Brewster Buffaloes, all had fallen before the Zero's guns. Shedeur Sakai looked out at the Zeros, early morning sunlight reflecting off their polished green paint. Each aircraft was an engineering masterpiece, every curve calculated for maximum performance. No armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, even the radio was often removed to save 30 pounds. Every ounce sacrificed for perfection. "This Hellcat," Sakai continued reading, his voice dripping with mockery, "has a wing area of 334 square feet. A bulky radial engine, carries 2,400 rounds of ammunition, armor everywhere, bulletproof glass, self-sealing fuel tanks holding 250 gallons. Nishizawa shook his head. "They've turned a fighter into a flying fortress. A Zero will fly circles around it like a hawk around a turkey." But what Sakai didn't know, what none of the Japanese naval aviators gathering in the tent knew, was that in exactly 30 days, this failure would begin the systematic annihilation of Japanese naval aviation. The F-6F Hellcat would achieve a kill ratio of 19-1. It would destroy 5,223 enemy aircraft, while losing only 270 in aerial combat. It would transform carrier warfare, break the back of Japanese air power, and prove that the Zero's reign of terror was built on a foundation of fatal assumptions. The mathematics of aerial supremacy was about to be rewritten by an aircraft that looked wrong, flew heavy, and seemed to violate every principle Japan had perfected. Yet within 6 months, the very pilots now laughing at intelligence reports would be writing final letters home, knowing that encountering Hellcats meant statistical certainty of death. The mathematics of confidence. The Japanese Navy's confidence in September 1943 wasn't arrogance. It was pure mathematics, steeped in blood and metal. Since December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service had achieved victory ratios that defied belief. At Pearl Harbor, they lost 29 aircraft while destroying 347. In the Philippines, 7 losses against 103 victories. Over Darwin, 2 losses versus 30 kills. The British Far East Fleet's air arm annihilated. The Dutch East Indies Air Force eliminated in days. At the center of this dominance flew the Mitsubishi A6M Zero, an aircraft that had rewritten the rules of fighter design. When American engineers tested captured Zeros in 1942, they initially refused to believe the performance figures. A fighter with the range of a bomber, the maneuverability of a biplane, and the firepower to destroy anything it caught, it seemed impossible. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, who would later become Japan's ace of aces with 87 confirmed kills, described the Zero in his recovered diary. Quote, "Flying the Zero is like wearing wings. The aircraft responds to thought, not just control inputs. American planes fly like trucks, powerful but clumsy. They build fighters like they build cars, heavy, overbuilt, wasteful. We build fighters like samurai swords. Every ounce is a decision, Every curve is a philosophy. The Zero achieved its miraculous performance through revolutionary design philosophy. Extra Super Duralumin, a classified aluminum alloy, created a structure 30% lighter than comparable American designs. No armor plate protected the pilot. No self-sealing fuel tanks added weight. Even the radio was often removed to save 30 pounds. Every ounce sacrificed for perfection. This Hellcat, Sakai continued reading, his voice dripping with mockery, has a wing area of 334 square feet, a bulky radial engine, carries 2,400 rounds of ammunition, armor everywhere, bulletproof glass, self-sealing fuel tanks holding 250 gallons. Nishizawa shook his head. They've turned a fighter into a flying fortress. A Zero will fly circles around it like a hawk around a turkey. But what Sakai didn't know, what none of the Japanese naval aviators gathering in the tent knew, was that in exactly 30 days, this failure would begin the systematic annihilation of Japanese naval aviation. The F-6F Hellcat would achieve a kill ratio of 19-1. It would destroy 5,223 enemy aircraft, while losing only 270 in aerial combat. It would transform carrier warfare, break the back of Japanese air power, and prove that the Zero's reign of terror was built on a foundation of fatal assumptions. The mathematics of aerial supremacy was about to be rewritten by an aircraft that looked wrong, flew heavy, and seemed to violate every principle Japan had perfected. Yet within 6 months, the very pilots now laughing at intelligence reports would be writing final letters home, knowing that encountering Hellcats meant statistical certainty of death. The first reports. Early 1943, Combined Fleet Headquarters. The first reports of the F-6F Hellcat reached Japanese intelligence through neutral Swedish sources in early 1943. The specifications seemed like propaganda, or perhaps deliberate misinformation. Captain Minoru Genda, the tactical genius who had planned Pearl Harbor, reviewed the specifications at Combined Fleet Headquarters. His analysis, preserved in Japanese defense archives, was dismissive. The Americans have learned nothing. This Hellcat represents the continuation of their failed philosophy, attempting to overcome pilot skill with weight of machinery. A Zero will fly circles around it. Aerial combat is not about strength, but about elegance. They have forgotten this lesson. The mathematics seem to support his assessment. The Zero's wing loading of 22 pounds per square foot gave it a turning radius of 612 feet. The Hellcat's wing loading of 36.5 pounds per square foot suggested a turning radius over 900 feet. In a turning fight, the basis of all Japanese fighter tactics, the Hellcat would be helpless. But there was a variable they had overlooked. The Americans had no intention of playing by Japanese rules. September 30, 1943, Marcus Island, First Blood. Petty Officer First Class Yoshio Fukui was flying escort for a reconnaissance mission when he spotted them, 6 dark blue shapes climbing from the southeast. His first thought, recorded in his after-action report, B-25 bombers on a strange heading. Then they turned and he saw the distinctive silhouette. Single engine, massive fuselage, wings that seemed too short for the body. First encounter with F-6F type fighter, he wrote. Initial impression, Americans have mounted fighter guns on a torpedo bomber, engaged with standard tactics. Standard tactics meant using the Zero's superior turn rate to get on the enemy's tail. Fukui rolled into a diving turn, expecting the heavy American fighter to continue straight, allowing him to curve on to its 6 o'clock position. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The Hellcat didn't run. It didn't try to turn with him. It went vertical. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, producing 2,000 horsepower, 700 more than the Zero's Nakajima Sakai's 1,130 horsepower, drove the Hellcat upward at 3,500 feet per minute. Fukui, attempting to follow, watched his airspeed decay as the Zero struggled against gravity. At 15,000 feet, the Hellcat performed a maneuver that shouldn't have been possible for its weight, a hammerhead turn that dropped it directly onto Fukui's tail. The American opened fire at 400 meters, Fukui reported. 6 machine guns, not the 4 we expected. The volume of fire was unprecedented. My aircraft took 17 hits in 3 seconds. Only by dropping into a spin did I escape. Fukui survived, barely making it back to Marcus Island with his Zero riddled with holes. His wingman, Petty Officer 2nd Class Masao Sato, didn't return. Neither did the reconnaissance plane they were escorting. First blood to the Hellcat. And it was only the beginning. Learning through blood. October 5, 1943, Wake Island. The expensive lesson. Lieutenant Yoshio Shiga led 12 Zeros from the 252nd Air Group to intercept what appeared to be another nuisance raid. American carriers had been launching these hit-and-run attacks for months, usually fleeing before Japanese fighters could fully engage. This time would be different. We climbed to 20,000 feet, Shiga recorded in his diary. Below us, 12 F-6F fighters in 3 divisions. We held every advantage: altitude, position, surprise. Victory was certain. The engagement that followed shattered Japanese tactical doctrine. As the Zeros dove on the Hellcats, the American fighters didn't scatter or attempt to turn. They maintained formation, accelerating in a gentle dive that kept their energy high. When the Zeros opened fire at maximum range, hoping for lucky hits, the Hellcats simply absorbed the punishment. The Hellcat's armor included 212 pounds of plate protecting the pilot, 110 pounds around the oil system, self-sealing tanks that could take dozens of hits. As the Zeros exhausted their ammunition in diving passes, the Hellcats executed their counterattack. Instead of turning to dogfight, they used their weight as a weapon. Climbing at full power, they reached altitude where the Zero's engine struggled for oxygen. At 25,000 feet, the Hellcat was still producing 1,650 horsepower. The Zero was down to 900. They came down on us like hawks on sparrows, Shiga wrote. Their weight gave them speed we couldn't match. They would dive, fire those 6 terrible guns, then climb away before we could react. That wasn't dogfighting, that was execution. 8 Zeros were shot down. No Hellcats were lost. November 11, 1943, Rabaul, the Prophet. The assembled pilots of the 204th Air Group listened as Lieutenant Commander Takeo Tanimizu, with 32 victories, briefed them on American tactics. Tanimizu was one of the few pilots who had survived multiple encounters with Hellcats. "Forget everything you know about air combat," he told them. "The Americans have changed the rules. They no longer fight our fight. They fight like executioners, not warriors." Tanimizu explained what Japanese pilots were slowly, fatally learning. The Hellcat wasn't designed to outturn the Zero. It was designed to never need to. Using a combat doctrine called energy fighting, Hellcat pilots maintained speed and altitude, converting potential energy to kinetic energy in slashing attacks that gave Zero pilots no chance to use their superior maneuverability. "They work in pairs," Tanimizu continued. "One high, one low. While you engage one, the other is already diving on you. Their radios, which we laughed at for adding wake, let them coordinate perfectly. We fly as individual samurai. They fight as a machine." A young pilot, Junior Lieutenant Sabaru Kitahata, raised his hand. "So how do we beat them, sir?" Silence stretched in the tent. Finally, Tanimizu answered, his voice heavy. "We don't beat them. We survive them. And if we're lucky, we kill 1 or 2 before they kill us." The Technology Chasm. December 1943. Truck Lagoon. Truth revealed. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who had led the Pearl Harbor attack, now served as Air Operations Officer for the combined fleet. His inspection of damaged Zeros returning from encounters with Hellcats revealed the growing technology gap. The disparity in firepower was pure mathematics. The Hellcat's 6 Browning M2 machine guns fired 750 rounds per minute each, 4,500 rounds per minute total. Each .5 caliber bullet weighed 46 grams and traveled at 2,900 feet per second, delivering 3,500 foot-pounds of energy. The Zero's two 7.7mm machine guns fired projectiles weighing 11 grams at 2,300 feet per second, 750 foot-pounds of energy. But more disturbing were reports of American radar-guided fighter direction. While Japanese pilots still relied on eyesight to spot enemies, Hellcat pilots were guided to their targets by shipboard radar controllers who could see Japanese aircraft from 50 miles away. Lieutenant Sadamu Komachi described his first radar-directed interception. "We were climbing through clouds when they hit us, no warning, no visual contact. Hellcats diving from above, exactly on our heading, perfectly positioned. They knew where we were, our altitude, our course. We were blind men fighting those who could see in the dark." Fuchida closed his report with a bone-chilling sentence: "We are not losing a battle. We are losing a revolution." January 1944, the pilot crisis. The Japanese pilot crisis was becoming catastrophic. The pre-war Imperial Navy pilot training program had been the world's most demanding. Training took 3 years, with pilots entering combat with 700 flight hours. Army pilots received a minimum of 500 hours. They were artists of aerial combat, trained in aerobatics, gunnery, and the spiritual philosophy of air fighting. By early 1944, Japanese naval pilots were entering combat with 300 flight hours, Army pilots with 200 hours. Fuel shortages meant most training was done in gliders. Gunnery practice was limited to 50 rounds per pilot. Formation flying, instrument flight, radio procedures, all eliminated to rush pilots to the front. Meanwhile, American pilots were arriving with a minimum of 300 hours, including 50 hours in type. They had fired thousands of practice rounds, practiced carrier landings until they were automatic, learned energy tactics safely over Texas airfields. Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto, training officer at Kasamigara Naval Air Station, wrote in his final report, "We are sending children to fight professionals." Yesterday, Ensign Yamamoto arrived at the front. He had never fired his guns in flight. "We have no ammunition for practice." He had never flown at night. "We have no fuel for such training." He lasted 7 minutes in his first combat. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. June 19, 1944, Philippine Sea. This was the battle Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa had been waiting for, the decisive engagement that would destroy American carrier power in the Pacific. 9 carriers, 450 aircraft, their best remaining pilots. This would be the Tsushima of modern warfare, the battle that would prove Japanese spirit superior to American material. Against them stood Task Force 58 with 15 carriers and 956 aircraft. 450 of them were F-6F Hellcats. At 8:30, the first wave of 69 Japanese aircraft launched. American radar detected them at 150 miles. Hellcats were vectored for interception, with perfect positioning. Altitude advantage, sun at their backs, approaching from Japanese blind spots. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, leading the fighter escort, saw the Hellcats minutes before engagement. They were stacked from 20,000 to 30,000 feet, at least 60 of them, waiting like a steel curtain. We were at 18,000 feet. Every advantage was theirs. I knew right then we were flying into death. The engagement lasted 12 minutes. Of 69 Japanese aircraft, 42 were shot down. Commander David McCampbell, CAG of Air Group 15, shot down 7 aircraft that day. His wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, got 6. The Zeros tried to turn with us, McCampbell reported. We simply refused. We'd make a high-side run, shoot one down, zoom climb back to altitude. They tried to follow, stall out, and another Hellcat would pick them off. That wasn't dogfighting, that was harvesting. The second, third, fourth waves all met the same fate. American radar saw them coming. Fighter direction positioned Hellcats perfectly, and the hastily trained, inexperienced Japanese pilots had no chance against veteran American pilots flying superior aircraft. By day's end, Japan had lost 346 carrier aircraft plus 50 land-based aircraft. American losses, 30 aircraft from all causes. American pilots in their ready rooms that evening coined the term turkey shoot. The enemy aircraft had been as helpless as game birds. Letters home. The next day, Junior Lieutenant Toshio Hashimoto sat in his damaged Zero's cockpit at Guam, writing what he knew would be his last letter home. Dear Mother and Father, tomorrow I will fly again. Perhaps this is the last time I write. They told us the Hellcat was just a heavy aircraft. They were wrong. It is death with wings. Today I watched 30 of my comrades fall. Not because we lacked skill or courage, but because we are fighting the future with weapons of the past. Our Zero is the most beautiful samurai sword ever forged. But the Hellcat is a machine gun, and no amount of swordsmanship can defeat a bullet. I am not afraid. I am only sad that we underestimated our opponent for too long. We laughed at their weight when we should have feared the power behind it. Please tell my sister that her brother fought with honor. And tell Japan that we fought an enemy who underestimated our intelligence as much as we underestimated their strength. Your loving son, Toshio. Hashimoto never sent the letter. He was shot down the next day by a Hellcat from VF-2.
McCampbell's record. October 24, 1944, Late Gulf. Commander David McCampbell was leading 7 Hellcats from USS Essex when he intercepted a force of 60 Japanese aircraft heading for the American fleet. The mathematics were brutal, 7 against 60. But McCampbell had been flying Hellcats for 18 months. He knew what Japanese pilots had yet to learn. In modern air combat, system quality beats individual quantity. Gentlemen, he said over the radio to his formation, we have work to do. Maintain energy. Nobody turns. Shoot and climb. Understood? 6 voices confirmed. The battle lasted 90 minutes. McCampbell shot down 9 aircraft, 5 Zeros and 4 bombers. His wingman, Roy Rushing, destroyed 6 more. Together, 7 Hellcats had routed 60 Japanese aircraft, destroying 15 without loss. I ran out of ammunition after the 9th kill, McCampbell recorded. The Hellcat performed flawlessly throughout, not a single hit on my aircraft despite being outnumbered 8-1. This was no longer aerial combat. This was a demonstration of how an industrial nation could turn mass production, systematic training, and superior design into a decisive weapon of war. The psychological collapse. Hellcat Psychosis. After the Philippine Sea and late Gulf battles, Japanese military psychologists coined a term for what surviving pilots were experiencing: Hellcat Psychosis. Symptoms included nightmares of R-2800 engine sounds, twitching at the sound of any aircraft, paralysis when encountering dark blue aircraft silhouettes, belief that survival was impossible. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, who had once laughed at intelligence reports about the Hellcat, encountered them for the first time in June 1944. Despite his skill and experience, with 28 official victories, though modern historians estimate closer to 15 actual victories, he was nearly killed in his first engagement. I performed my best aerobatics, he wrote in his autobiography. Loops, rolls, splits, S-turns, every maneuver I had perfected over 200 combats. The Hellcat followed easily, almost casually. It wasn't faster in the turn, it wasn't, but it didn't need to be. Every time I lost energy in a maneuver, the Hellcat was there, waiting with those 6 terrible guns. I survived only because the American pilot made an error. He forgot to release his drop tank before combat. That slowed him enough for me to escape into clouds. I once thought myself invincible. The Hellcat taught me humility in 10 minutes. Admiral Ozawa's admission. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, who had commanded the Japanese fleet at Philippine Sea, provided perhaps the most honest assessment in his after-action report. The enemy's radar-guided fighter direction achieved something we thought impossible: the industrialization of air combat. Each Hellcat was not an individual fighter, but a component in a vast machine. Our pilots, no matter how skilled, were engaging not planes, but a system that saw farther than we could see, flew higher than we could climb, shot more accurately than we could aim. We laughed at the Hellcat because we measured it by our standards. We saw its weight and thought slow. We saw its size and thought clumsy. We saw its design and thought obsolete. We were wrong. They didn't build a fighter. They built a weapon system that could fly. The Kamikaze Equation. October 1944. Desperation's transformation. As Hellcat dominance became absolute, Japan made a terrible decision: turn pilots into guided missiles. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, father of the kamikaze program, justified it with stark mathematics. If a Zero attacks a carrier conventionally, probability of success is near zero. The Hellcats will destroy it. If the Zero becomes a bomb, probability of hitting increases to 30%. The pilot dies either way. At least as a kamikaze, his death has meaning. On October 25, 1944, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, the ace of aces, escorted the first official kamikaze mission led by Lieutenant Yukio Seki. In that battle, Nishizawa claimed his 86th and 87th victories, 2 F-6F Hellcats. The next day, October 26, 1944, Nishizawa died as a passenger aboard a transport shot down by Hellcats from VF-14. Japan's greatest ace, helpless without a fighter, fell to the very aircraft he had briefly bested. The irony was perfect and cruel. Okinawa Apocalypse. April-June 1945, the mowing machine. Operation Iceberg. Japan launched 1,900 kamikaze sorties against the American fleet off Okinawa. The Hellcat became not just a fighter, but a defender against the desperation of suicide attacks. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia, commanding his Flying Circus Division, shot down 23 Japanese aircraft during the campaign. His tactical innovations, using divisions of 4 aircraft in coordinated attacks, made traditional Japanese tactics suicidal. "We developed what we called the mowing machine," Valencia explained. 4 Hellcats in line abreast, separated by 100 yards, would sweep through Japanese formations at high speed. Each pilot covered his sector. We'd make one pass, climb back to altitude, and repeat. For Japanese pilots, it was like flying into a meat grinder. No escape, no chance, only the inexorable mathematics of destruction. The mathematics of the Okinawa campaign were stark. Hellcats flew 38,038 combat sorties, claimed 2,351 victories, lost 249 aircraft, 9.5 to 1 ratio. Prevented approximately 80% of kamikaze aircraft from reaching their targets. The pain of young pilots. Junior Lieutenant Ichio Yamada, 19 years old, with 40 hours of flight time, wrote in his diary the night before his first and only kamikaze flight.
They showed us films of Zeros fighting Hellcats. They told us we could win if we were brave enough. But I talked to the surviving pilots. They told me the truth, that the Hellcat is invincible, that fighting them is suicide. So they've made suicide the official weapon. If I must die, at least let my death achieve something. I don't hate the Americans. I'm just sad that my country chose this path, that we couldn't admit we had lost until we ran out of young men to send to their deaths. If anyone reads this, know that I was not a hero. I was just a boy given a zero and told to go die for the emperor. And that our laughter about the Hellcat died long before we did. Yamada never came close to the American fleet. A Hellcat from VF-17 intercepted him 40 miles out. The fight lasted 30 seconds. The technology chasm. F6F5, the evolution of perfection. By 1945, the technology gap had become unbridgeable. The F6F5 Hellcat incorporated improvements that made it even deadlier. Water injection boosting power to 2,200 horsepower. Zero-length rocket launchers. Improved armor. K-14 computing gun sight that automatically calculated deflection. Professor Jiro Horikoshi, designer of the Zero, studied the Hellcat extensively after the war. His conclusion was devastating. We designed an aircraft for 1941. They designed an aircraft system for 1945. While we were perfecting the sword, they were building the industrial age. We optimized every ounce to achieve unmanned combat perfection. They built a system that protected pilots, maintained energy, and killed everything that flew close. The Zero required an artist. The Hellcat only needed a well-trained professional. In modern warfare, mass-producing professionals beats training artists. The production miracle. Grumman's factory in Bethpage, New York, operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. At peak production, a new Hellcat rolled off the assembly line every 60 minutes. The company produced 12,275 Hellcats in 30 months. In 1944, Japan produced 5,100 fighters of all types. America produced 35,000 fighters that year alone. It wasn't pilot skill, it wasn't fighting spirit, it wasn't samurai heritage. It was the pure mathematics of industrial capacity. Japan couldn't build enough Zeros to replace losses. America could lose 3 Hellcats for every Zero destroyed and still win through sheer production. But they didn't need to. The 19-1 meant they won in both quality and quantity.